King Jehu. King Jehu was the 10th king of Israel. He ruled for 28 years. And you can find that in 2 Kings 10:38. Can you not hear me? It's on. Now can you hear me? All right, good.
Did you announce that this was found? It's an access card.
Okay. C&P Ronnie, I think that's how you pronounce it, has lost a card. It's an access card. I think it's Ronnie.
So, access card, if you might know who the owner is.
It's not mine. Okay, he reigned from approximately 841 to 814. And his name means God is he, or Yahweh is he. King Joram was the king before King Jehu. And before we start and get into the lesson regarding King Jehu, I want to go back, and Neil covered quite a bit of this last week, but I'll go back and kind of get the background, the history of, so that when we get to King Jehu, it'll be more understandable. Because you remember last week, he actually didn't hand out, he put some sheets back there. And if you'll notice, several of the kings in Judah have the same name as the same kings in Israel. So it can get real confusing. And when I first started studying that, I didn't realize that. But anyway, if you would, we're going to start back in 1 Kings chapter 18. We're going to start with verse 20. And this is, as you know, is where the priests of Baal are defeated. You remember Joshua? We have the two altars that were built. And he has them build theirs. He builds his. Now there's approximately 450 prophets of Baal. And of course Elijah's all by himself. So we know what happens. They try everything and nothing happens. And then God goes and Elijah talks to God, prays to God. And of course he consumes the sacrifice and proves that he is the God of the world. Okay, and then, of course, those people are taken out and executed. Okay? Then, after that great conquest, guess what Elijah does? Ahab, in chapter 19, verse 1, it says, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he'd killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so may the gods do to me, and more so, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. Now you would think Elijah would not be that afraid. But you got to understand, Jezebel and Ahab were killing all the prophets of God they could find. So he gets up and takes off and runs. He goes into the wilderness, and there he asks God to let him die. So he lays down to sleep. An angel of the Lord comes and tells him, wake up, eat, and drink. So he does that. And then he lays back down, goes to sleep again. The angel again tells him, you need to eat more, drink more, because it's going to be a long journey. So what happens then? He arises and God tells him to go. And he goes 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb. And I meant to figure out how far that was. Does anybody know how far that was from? It was around Damascus is where he was at. But anyway, it was quite a distance. So he goes, and you remember the story about that, how that he goes and he actually hides in a cave. And then we have the whirlwind, and we have the thunder, the earthquakes, and then God speaks in a small voice and tells Elijah what he needs to do next. And he tells him, you need to go back and you need to anoint 3 people. And the 3 people he is to anoint is Hazael, the king of Syria, which that's unusual because I've never heard of a prophet of God going to like a foreign country or a foreign leader and anointing him. But that's what he's told. And if you look, that's actually in verse 15 of chapter 19. And the Lord said to him, go and return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. I said Israel, I think. Assyria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of, and I can't pronounce that word, shall be the prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu will put to death. And the one that escapes from the sword of Jehu, then of course Elisha will put to death. And then he reminds Elijah that in verse 18, yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, or every mouth that has not kissed him. And then when we get to chapter 20 in 1 Kings, we see that Ben-hadad, the king of Syria, goes up and fights against Israel. Okay? Ahab defeats him. Okay? And he captures him. Does anybody remember what happened after the defeat? I think Neil talked about this last week. He lets him go. And that was, very unusual that he should let him go. Because you know how Syria was toward the Israelites. Now, if you'll turn to chapter 20, verse 42. And this is what a servant or a prophet of the Lord has to tell Ahab. And he said to him, thus saith the Lord, because you have let go out of your hand the man whom I have devoted to destruction. Therefore, your life shall be for his life, and your people for his people. And of course, the king got upset, went home sullen like he did before when he tries to get into Naboth's vineyard, which we're about to read about. Now, you remember in chapter 21, we have Naboth's vineyard. You know that Ahab wants to take it because it's right next to his, castle, whatever you want to call it. So he can't get it because Naboth does not want to sell it. Okay, so again, the king gets on his bed like we were talking about last week, Neil was, about how he turned his face to the wall, wouldn't eat, and was kind of like a child, And then Jezebel says, are you not the king? So Jezebel plots against Naboth. And you remember the story about how she goes and gets a couple of witnesses against him, and they accuse him of blasphemy. Then, of course, he's taken out and stoned. And then, of course, Ahab gets his vineyard. And then, when you go back over and you look at chapter 21 of 1 Kings, the Lord condemns Ahab for that. And he says in verse 19, and this is where he tells Elijah to go to Ahab, and he says, thus saith the Lord, have you killed and also taken possession? And you shall say to him, thus saith the Lord, in the place where the dogs lick up the blood of Naboth, shall the dogs lick your own blood. Ahab said to Elijah, he wanted to know, how he'd found him. But, that was irrelevant because he had found him. So he tells him that in verse, let's see, verse 21, behold, I will bring disaster upon you. I will utterly burn you up and will cut off from Ahab every male, bond and free in Israel. And I'll make your house like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah, for anger to which you have provoked me, because you have made Israel to sin. And then he condemns also Jezebel. Jezebel, the Lord also said, the dogs shall eat Jezebel within the walls of Jezreel. And anyone belongs to Ahab who died in the city shall the dogs eat, and anyone that dies in the open country, the birds of heaven shall eat. And of course, then Ahab repents. And it's amazing that God, it's amazing to me, it's not amazing, I'm sure, to God, but it was amazing to me that his repentance must have been really sincere. Because he says, in going a little bit further down, and the Lord's talking to Elijah, and he says, have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me? He says, because he has humbled himself before me, I will not bring disaster in this day, but in his son's days I will bring disaster upon his house. Okay. Now, let me get over to the second page because I'm already way past that. Okay, then Ahab decides to go to war. And it says, he asked the false prophets, would he be able to win this war? And of course, they tell him, oh yeah, you're going to win it. But then the prophet of God tells him, there's no way, you're not going to win. And if you look down in chapter 22, verse 19, therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the hosts of heaven standing beside him, and on his right and on his left. And this Lord, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, other said another. Then the Spirit came forth and says, I will entice him, and have a lying spirit. So they go to war, and then of course, if you look over in chapter 22, in verse 20 through 40, Ahab is killed in battle. He tries to disguise himself, and this is what Neil was talking about last week. He disguises himself, but that doesn't help. And then it says, Ahab slept with his fathers, and Ahaz, his son, reigned in his place. Okay, so now we got Ahaz, who is the king of Israel. And you're going to have to remember, because in a minute we're going to find another king named Ahaz, who's the king of Judah. So I was really getting confused when I was reading this. Okay, so he's reigning over Israel now. And then we get into 2 Kings chapter 1, and then it's where Elijah denounces King Ahaz. And it says in chapter 1, verse 1 of 2 Kings, after the death of Ahab, Moab, rebelled against Israel. Now, Ahaz had fell through the lattice in its upper chamber in Samaria and laid sick. So he sent messengers telling them, go inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover from this sickness. But the angel of the Lord said to Elijah, arise and go up and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and say to him, is it because there is no God in Israel that you're going to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? Now therefore, thus saith the Lord, you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone, but you shall surely die. And of course, Ahab gets upset about this message, so he sends a battalion of 50 soldiers to go get Elijah. So when they come, he says to them, or actually I think he does say it then. He says to them, if I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume these men, 50 men. And sure enough, that's what happens. And then he decides to send another 50. Well, the same thing happens. And then, which is unusual to me, but again, the third time he sends 50 men. But this time the guy comes and he begs to not kill him and his men. So he comes and tells them. And he says, if you look down in 2 Kings chapter 1, he says, because there is no God in Israel to inquire of this word, therefore you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone up, but you shall surely die. So he died according to the words of the Lord that Elijah had spoken. Because, Jehoram, it's actually, I can't even pronounce it now. But he becomes king in his place in the second year. And he was the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, because Ahaz had no son. Okay, chapter 2, we know that Elijah now goes to heaven, and Elisha becomes the new prophet. Okay, then if you would, we're going over to Kings chapter, I want to make sure I got this right first before I tell you. Okay, Joram becomes king over Israel. Okay, now, you remember king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, who was captured by King Ahab? And he lets him go. Well, you'll see in 2 Kings chapter 8, 7 through 15, that he is murdered by Hazael, and he becomes the king of Syria. And so let's go over to chapter 8 of 2 Kings. And let me get my verse here. Okay, the thing I want to bring out right here is Joram, the son of Ahab, made war with Hazael of Syria at Ramoth-Gilead, and the Syrian wounded Joram. Now remember, Joram is the king of Israel. So guess where he goes to get well? He goes to Jezreel. Okay? So we're now up to chapter 9. Chapter 9, we see that Elisha the prophet is called one of the sons of the prophet, and said to him, tie up your garment, take his flask of oil with your hand, and go to Ramoth-Gilead. And when you arrive, look for Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, son of Nimshi. Go in and have him rise from among his fellows, and lead him to an inner chamber. Then take the flask of oil, pour on his head, and say, thus saith the Lord, I anoint you king over Israel. Then open the door and flee, and do not linger. And that's exactly what this young prophet does. He goes in, gets the commander aside, and says, I anoint you king over Israel, the Lord, over the people of the Lord, over Israel. And you shall strike down the house of Ahab your master, so that I may avenge on Jezebel the blood of my servants the prophet, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off from Ahab every male, bond and free in Israel, and I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam. So, he's got his marching orders now. He knows what he's supposed to do. He's now been anointed king of Israel. Now, Joram is still officially the king. Just remember that. So now it's his job to go and take care of that. So it's almost like a mutiny is what I would call it, or a military rebellion that we read about like in Africa and places like it. But this is different because the Lord is calling the shots here. So if you look down, it says in verse 14, thus Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Joram. Now Joram with all Israel had been on guard at Ramoth-Gilead against Hazael, the king of Israel. But the king of Joram returned to be held in Jezreel of the wound the Syrians had given him when he fought against the king of Hazael, king of Syria. So Jehu said, he goes and says, if it is your decision, let no one slip out of the city to go tell the news in Jezreel. Then Jehu mounted his chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram laid there. And King Ahaziah, king of Judah, comes down to visit Joram. Now, they're kinfolk. They're related by marriage. So this Ahaziah is the king of Judah. Remember, the other one that's already died. Now we've got Joram and we've got Ahaziah. Okay, so he goes down to Jezreel to visit. Okay, so now who's coming? Of course, we know Jehu's coming with his army. And he says, now the watchman was standing on the tower in Jezreel, and he saw the company of Jehu as he came and said, I see a company. And Joram said, take a horseman and send to meet him, and let him say, is it peace? So a man on the horseback went to him and said, thus the king is at peace. And Jehu says, what do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me. And the watchman reported, saying, the messenger reached them, but he is not coming back. Then he sent out a second horseman, who came to them and said, thus the king has said, is it peace? And Jehu answered, what do you have to do with peace? Turn around and ride behind me. Again the watchman reports, he reached them, but he is not coming back, and is driving in this version it says furiously. The other places it says he was driving like a maniac. So anyway, they kind of knew who he was. So Joram says, make my chariot ready. Then Joram, king of Israel, and Ahaziah, king of Judah, set out, each in his own chariot, and went to meet Jehu. And they met him, guess where? At the property of Naboth, the Jezreelite. And when Joram saw Jehu, he said, is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, what peace can there be, so long as the whoring and the sorcery of your mother Jezebel are so many? Then Joram reigned about and fled, saying to Ahaziah, treachery, O Ahaziah. And Jehu drew his bow with his full strength and shot Joram between the shoulders, so that the arrow pierced his heart and sank in his chariot. And Jehu said to Bidkar, his aide, take him up, throw him on the plot of the ground belonging to Naboth, the Jezreelite. For remember, when you and I rode side by side behind Ahab, his father, how the Lord made this pronouncement against him. As surely as I saw this yesterday, the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, declared the Lord, I will repay you on this plot of ground. Now therefore, take him up, throw him on the plot of ground, in accordance with the word of the Lord. When Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled, but he didn't get away. He got shot, and he also died. And of course, he was taken and buried in the city of David. Now, the next thing that occurs is, now right now you have 2 executions, or 2 killings. Then if you look at verse 30 of Kings 9, you'll see that Jehu now comes to Jezreel. And guess who's at Jezreel? Jezebel. Now this is what I don't understand. And she painted her eyes and adorned her head and looked out the window. Now if I'd have been her, I would have been running myself, because I would have been getting away from there. But anyway, as Jehu entered the gate, she said, is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master? And he lifted up his face to the window and said, who is on my side? Who? 2 or 3 eunuchs looked down at him, and he said, throw her down. So they threw her down, and some of her blood splattered on the wall and on the horses, and they trampled on her. And then what is really odd to me, again, is then he went in and ate and drank. And he said, see how to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is the king's daughter. But when they went to bury her, they found no more of her than the skull, the feet, and the palms of her hand. And when they came back and told him, he said, this is the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Elijah. And in the territory of Jezreel, the dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as dung on the face of the fields in the territory of Jezreel. So no one can say, this is Jezebel. Okay, now he's taking care of 3 of the things that our God has asked him to do. Now we get to chapter 10, and Ahab has 70 sons in Samaria. So he goes and he sends letters to Samaria saying, are you with me? First of all, he says, all right, get the 70 sons, whoever's the bravest, whoever's the strongest, put him on the throne and I'll fight him. Well, they said, we're not doing that because you've already killed 2 kings. There's no way we're going to be able to help you out. Not help you out, be able to fight you. So whatever you say, we will do. Okay, so he sends a second letter, and he says, if you are on my side, and if you are ready to obey me, take the heads of your master's sons, come to me at Jezreel tomorrow at this time. Now the king's 70 persons were with the great men of the city who were bringing them up. And as soon as the letter came to them, they took the king's son, slaughtered them, 70 persons, and put their heads in a basket and sent him to Jezreel. And when the message came and told them, they gave and brought the heads of the king's sons. He said, lay them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the gate until the morning. And that's what he did. And I was reading, that is one of the practices in the Eastern world of how to bring fear upon a country or upon a city. So they piled the 70 heads in 2 baskets, and then he goes, and now he says in verse 10 of chapter 10 of 2 Kings, know then that there shall fall to earth nothing of the Lord which the Lord spoke concerning the house of Ahab. For the Lord has done what he said by his servant Elijah. So Jehu struck down all who remained of the house of Ahab in Jezreel, and all his great men and his close friends and his priests, until he left them none remaining. And then he sets out to go to Samaria. Okay, now he's already executed quite a few people. Then it says, like I said in verse 12, he sets out on his way to Samaria. And then verse 13, Jehu meets the relatives, Ahaz, king of Judah, and says, who are you? And they answered and said, we are the relatives, not natives, relatives of Ahaz. We came down to visit the royal prince and the sons of the queen's mother. He said, take them alive. He took them alive, and then he slaughtered them, all 42 of them. And then he departed. Then Jehu arrives in Samaria. And then Jehu tricks the prophets of Baal. If you'll start in verse 18 of chapter 10, it says, then Jehu assembled all the people and said to them, Ahab served Baal a little, but Jehu will serve him much. Now therefore call to all the prophets of Baal, all his worshippers, all his priests, let none be missing, for I have a great sacrifice to offer to Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live. But Jehu did this with cunning in order to destroy the worshippers of Baal. And Jehu ordered, sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal. So they proclaimed it. Jehu sent throughout all Israel, and all the worshippers of Baal came. So there was not one man left who did not come. And they entered the house of Baal. The house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. And he said to them, who was in charge of the wardrobe, bring out the vestments of all the worshippers of Baal. So he brought out the vestments for them. Then Jehu sent into the house of Baal Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, and he said to the worshippers of Baal, search and see that there is no servant of the Lord here among you, but only the worshippers of Baal. Then they went out to offer sacrifice and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed 80 men outside and said, the man who allows any of those who I give you into the hand to escape, I'll take your life for his life. So as soon as he had made an end of the offering, the burnt offering, Jehu said to the guards and to the officers, go in, strike them down, let not a man escape. So then they put them to the sword. And the guards and the officers cast them out and went into the inner room of the house of Baal. And they brought out the pillars that was in the house of Baal and burned it. And they demolished it, the pillar of Baal, and demolished the house of Baal, and made it a latrine to this day. And then from verse 28 through the end of the chapter, we have Jehu reigning in Israel. And it says in verse 28 that he wiped out Baal from Israel. But Jehu did not turn aside from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. That is, the calves that were in Bethel and Dan. And the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in carrying out what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. So there will be 4 more kings under that dynasty. But then Jehu was not careful, it says in verse 31, to walk in the laws of the Lord and the God of Israel with all his heart. He did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin. So in that case, he was not completely obedient to God. And I think we can take from that we can do things and not be going all the way. God, Jesus says he would rather you be hot or cold than lukewarm. So you either have to be all in or all out. And Jehu was not all in. Because if he had been, he'd have taken away the golden calves. But he didn't do that. He decided that for some reason not to do that. And that's Jehu, who reigned in Israel. Now, the other time that he is mentioned, Jehu is mentioned, if you will turn to Hosea, the first chapter, verse 4, it says, the Lord said to him, speaking about Hosea, call him Jezreel, and that's his first son. For just in a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And that's exactly what happened. So he had sons to reign for 4 generations, and then that was the end of it. And then I think there's like 4 or 5 more kings left in Israel, and then Assyria carries them away. And that is Jehu, king of Israel. Hope there's not any questions, because I don't see Neil here. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. But it just goes to show you that we have to be wholehearted. We can't be half in, half out. And that's all I have. Thank you.